Elvis Presley. Elvis Aaron Presley, born January 8, 1935, also known simply as Elvis, was an American singer and actor. Regarded as one of the most significant cultural icons of the 20th century, he is often referred to as the King of Rock and Roll, or simply the King. Presley was born in Tupelo, Mississippi, and relocated to Memphis, Tennessee, with his family when he was 13 years old. His music career began there in 1954, recording at Sun Records with producer Sam Phillips, who wanted to bring the sound of African American music to a wider audience. Presley, on rhythm acoustic guitar and accompanied by lead guitarist Scotty Moore and bassist Bill Black, was a pioneer of rockabilly, an up-tempo, backbeat-driven fusion of country music and rhythm and blues. In 1955, drummer DJ Fontana joined to complete the lineup of Presley's classic quartet, and RCA Victor acquired his contract in a deal arranged by Colonel Tom Parker, who would manage him for more than 2 decades. Presley's first RCA single, Heartbreak Hotel, was released in January 1956 and became a #1 hit in the United States. With a series of successful network television appearances and chart-topping records, he became the leading figure of the newly popular sound of rock and roll. His energized interpretations of songs and sexually provocative performance style, combined with a singularly potent mix of influences across color lines during a transformative era in race relations, made him enormously popular and controversial. In November 1956, Presley made his film debut in Love Me Tender. Drafted into military service in 1958, Presley relaunched his recording career 2 years later with some of his most commercially successful work. He held few concerts, however, and guided by Parker, proceeded to devote much of the 1960s to making Hollywood films and soundtrack albums, most of them critically derided. In 1968, following a 7-year break from live performances, he returned to the stage in the acclaimed television comeback special Elvis, which led to an extended Las Vegas concert residency and a string of highly profitable tours. In 1973, Presley gave the first concert by a solo artist to be broadcast around the world, Aloha from Hawaii. Presley's divorce was finalized on October 9, 1973. By then, his health was in major and serious decline. Twice during the year, he overdosed on barbiturates, spending 3 days in a coma in his hotel suite after the first incident. Towards the end of 1973, he was hospitalized, semi-comatose from the effects of a pethidine addiction. According to his primary care physician, Dr. George C. Nichopoulos, Presley felt that by getting drugs from a doctor, he wasn't the common everyday junkie getting something off the street. Since his comeback, he had staged more live shows with each passing year, and 1973 saw 168 concerts, his busiest schedule ever. Despite his failing health, in 1974, he undertook another intensive touring schedule. Presley's condition declined precipitously in September. Keyboardist Tony Brown remembered Presley's arrival at a University of Maryland concert. He fell out of the limousine, to his knees. People jumped to help, and he pushed them away like, "Don't help me." He walked on stage and held onto the mic for the first 30 minutes like it was a post. Everybody's looking at each other like, is the tour gonna happen? Guitarist John Wilkinson recalled, he was all gut. He was slurring. He was so effed up. It was obvious he was drugged. It was obvious there was something terribly wrong with his body. It was so bad the words to the songs were barely intelligible. I remember crying. He could barely get through the introductions. Wilkinson recounted that a few nights later in Detroit, I watched him in his dressing room, just draped over a chair, unable to move. So often I thought, boss, why don't you just cancel this tour and take a year off? I mentioned something once in a guarded moment. He patted me on the back and said, it'll be all right. Don't you worry about it. Presley continued to play to sell-out crowds. Cultural critic Marjorie Garber wrote that he was now widely seen as a garish pop crooner. In effect, he had become Liberace. Even his fans were now middle-aged matrons and blue-haired grandmothers. On July 13, 1976, Vernon Presley, who had become deeply involved in his son's financial affairs, fired Memphis Mafia bodyguards Red West, Presley's friend since the 1950s, Sonny West, and David Hebler, citing the need to cut back on expenses. Presley was in Palm Springs at the time, and some suggested that he was too cowardly to face the three himself. Another associate of Presley's, John O'Grady, argued that the bodyguards were dropped because their rough treatment of fans had prompted too many lawsuits. However, Presley's stepbrother, David Stanley, claimed that the bodyguards were fired because they were becoming more outspoken about Presley's drug dependency. RCA, which had enjoyed a steady stream of product from Presley for over a decade, grew anxious as his interest in spending time in the studio waned. After a December 1973 session that produced 18 songs, enough for almost 2 albums, he did not enter the studio in 1974. Parker sold RCA on another concert record, Elvis recorded live on stage in Memphis. Recorded on March 20, it included a version of How Great Thou Art that would win Presley his third and final competitive Grammy Award. All 3 of his competitive Grammy wins out of 14 total nominations were for gospel recordings. Presley returned to the studio in Hollywood in March 1975, but Parker's attempts to arrange another session toward the end of the year were unsuccessful. In 1976, RCA sent a mobile studio to Graceland that made possible 2 full-scale recording sessions at Presley's home. Even in that comfortable context, the recording process became a struggle for him. Presley and Linda Thompson split in November 1976, and he took up with a new girlfriend, Ginger Alden. He proposed to Alden and gave her an engagement ring 2 months later, though several of his friends later claimed that he had no serious intention of marrying again. Journalist Tony Sherman wrote that by early 1977, Presley had become a grotesque caricature of his sleek, energetic former self. Hugely overweight, his mind dulled by the pharmacopoeia he daily ingested, he was barely able to pull himself through his abbreviated concerts. In Alexandria, Louisiana, he was on stage for less than an hour and was impossible to understand. On March 31, Presley failed to perform in Baton Rouge, unable to get out of his hotel bed. A total of 4 shows had to be cancelled and rescheduled. Despite the accelerating deterioration of his health, he stuck to most touring commitments. According to Guralnick, fans were becoming increasingly voluble about their disappointment, but it all seemed to go right past Presley, whose world was now confined almost entirely to his room and his spiritualism books. A cousin, Billy Smith, recalled how Presley would sit in his room and chat for hours, sometimes recounting favorite Monty Python sketches and his own past escapades, but more often gripped by paranoid obsessions that reminded Smith of Howard Hughes. Way Down, Presley's last single issued during his career, was released on June 6. That month, CBS filmed 2 concerts for a TV special, Elvis in Concert, to be aired in October. In the first, shot in Omaha on June 19, Presley's voice, Guralnick writes, is almost unrecognizable, a small childlike instrument in which he talks more than sings most of the songs, casts about uncertainly for the melody and others, and is virtually unable to articulate her project. 2 days later, in Rapid City, South Dakota, he looked healthier, seemed to have lost a little weight, and sounded better, too, though by the conclusion of the performance, his face was framed in a helmet of blue-black hair from which sweat sheets down over pale, swollen cheeks. His final concert was held in Indianapolis at Market Square Arena on June 26. The book Elvis: What Happened?, co-written by the 3 bodyguards fired the previous year, was published on August 1. It was the first exposed to detail Presley's years of drug misuse. He was devastated by the book and tried unsuccessfully to halt its release by offering money to the publishers. By this point, he suffered from multiple ailments: glaucoma, high blood pressure, liver damage, and an enlarged colon, each magnified and possibly caused by drug abuse. On the evening of Tuesday, August 16, 1977, Presley was scheduled to fly out of Memphis to begin another tour. That afternoon, Ginger Alden discovered him in an unresponsive state on a bathroom floor. According to her eyewitness account, Elvis looked as if his entire body had completely frozen in a seated position while using the commode, and then had fallen forward, in that fixed position, directly in front of it. It was clear that, from the time whatever hit him to the moment he had landed on the floor, Elvis hadn't moved. Attempts to revive him failed, and his death was officially pronounced at 3:30 p.m. at the Baptist Memorial Hospital. President Jimmy Carter issued a statement that credited Presley with having permanently changed the face of American popular culture. Thousands of people gathered outside Graceland to view the open casket. One of Presley's cousins, Billy Mann, accepted $18,000 to secretly photograph the corpse. The picture appeared on the cover of the National Enquirer's biggest-selling issue ever. Alden struck a $105,000 deal with the Enquirer for her story, but settled for less when she broke her exclusivity agreement. Presley left her nothing in his will. Presley's funeral was held at Graceland on Thursday, August 18. Outside the gates, a car plowed into a group of fans, killing 2 women and critically injuring a third. About 80,000 people lined the processional route to Forest Hill Cemetery, where Presley was buried next to his mother. Within a few weeks, Way Down topped the country and UK pop charts. Following an attempt to steal Presley's body in late August, the remains of both Presley and his mother were reburied in Graceland's Meditation Garden on October 2. While an autopsy, undertaken the same day Presley died, was still in progress, Memphis medical examiner Dr. Jerry Francisco announced that the immediate cause of death was cardiac arrest. Asked if drugs were involved, he declared that drugs played no role in Presley's death. In fact, drug use was heavily implicated in Presley's death, writes Goralnik. The pathologists conducting the autopsy thought it possible, for instance, that he had suffered an anaphylactic shock brought on by the cotton pills he had gotten from his dentist, to which he was known to have had a mild allergy. A pair of lab reports filed 2 months later strongly suggested that polypharmacy was the primary cause of death. One reported 14 drugs in Elvis's system, 10 in significant quantity. In 1979, forensic pathologist Cyril Wecht conducted a review of the reports and concluded that a combination of central nervous system depressants had resulted in Presley's accidental death. Forensic historian and pathologist Michael Baden viewed the situation as complicated. Elvis had had an enlarged heart for a long time. That, together with his drug habit, caused his death. But he was difficult to diagnose, it was a judgment call. Presley is the best-selling solo music artist of all time. He was commercially successful in many genres, including pop, country, blues, and gospel. He won 3 Grammys, received the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award at age 36, and has been inducted into multiple Music Halls of Fame. He holds the records for the most RIA certified gold and platinum albums. In 2018, Presley was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom.